Hi, everybody. This is Chris Phillips, the founder of Democracy Cafe. Our website is democracycafe.org. And if you go to our drop down menu there, you'll see that we have hundreds of groups, not just in the U.S. across the fruited plain, but more and more the world over. And we're dedicated to establishing grassroots inquiry groups that bring together really diverse folks of lots of ages and walks of life to become more thoughtful and connected, and ideally to create more and more a democracy without borders, in which more open cells and more open societies go hand in glove. My guest today is Christopher L. McGowan, Divisional Director of Communications and Donor Engagement for the Salvation Army's Kentucky-Tennessee Division. But Chris, first of all, just thank you for being on the program.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be here.
Well, Chris, how did you ever hear about us?
That is a really good question. It was actually one of your books that first attracted me. I had not heard of the organization. I stumbled upon one of your books and fell in love with the book. And it kind of led me to reach out to you. And one thing just sort of led to another. And I am definitely sold on the mission.
That's so cool. That is like music to my ears. And you and I actually got together, and you watched and you participated in a Democracy Cafe that I did in Tacoma Park, Maryland, last spring, which is a very unique area. It was the nation's first declared nuclear-free zone. They allow undocumented immigrants to vote in local elections. Pretty different from Kentucky?
It is very different from Kentucky, although the passion is there, but the direction which that passion points would vary. Although we have our pockets as well.
Oh, sure you do. Of course you do. Now, Chris, you asked me. I still remember this. You sort of seemed to think that my way of inquiring with people just came naturally to me. You seemed surprised when I said no. It took a lot of hard work to learn how to deal with those kind of difficult folks.
I would agree. When I'm watching you navigate, both, regardless of how you felt about the comment, right, keeping it on topic and keeping the crowd engaged and involved, I was very impressed at how it seemed very, very natural to me as you moved through that.
Well, that makes me feel really good. I can't tell you how many times I've fallen flat on my face in my earlier years when people would come with like an agenda, and part of it was just to derail the dialogue.
Yes.
And so I would get used to, instead of getting defensive over time, I became interested in why they would want to do that. And so I would let them just have their say. I would nod my head, and then I would just keep doing the inquiry instead of letting them derail it. And lo and behold, the great proportion of these folks would suddenly start participating over time.
Oh, well, when you honor someone's opinion and you show them the respect that they're looking for, they're so surprised by that, especially in today's rather combative and divisive environment. It's shocking and frankly disarming. And so it's well done. Yeah. It was great to see, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. So, Chris, what the Salvation Army? How can you already calculate how much has been charitable giving the Salvation Army has more or less received for 2017?
I'm sure that yes, the numbers are out there. They're still doing final totals on it, but it is up over last year by all the lagging and all the leading indicators, which suggest that it is up over the previous year. Including some of our most visible signs of our kettles that go out during the Christmas season. Generally, more funds were raised in the communities around the United States. There, as always, there's ups and downs. But the other one that we see growing now is the online giving. Still, for nonprofits, only a sliver of the overall share, but the Army is seeing that continue to grow.
It's interesting because I'm very libertarianish when it comes to our nonprofit. I typically raise on a good year about $5,000. And you even said to me one time you could even see me writing a personal thank you. Like you could envision me as I was writing back to you, thanking you for your amazing generosity. Now that actually is unpracticed. That's just something I sincerely feel that just enormous thanks for anybody, to whom my quirky nonprofit speaks.
So I got your email, and I'm a fundraiser. So I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking to myself, there was enough personalization in this that it was extremely well done. My mind didn't wrap around the idea that you actually were hunched over your keyboard typing it out. I'm going through all the scenarios of how do you customize the variable fields to make this feel so very personal, only to find out that you truly were that personally involved in it.
Every email I write from scratch to thank somebody.
Well, it shows, and it is greatly appreciated on this side of it.
Yeah, but on your side, I couldn't do that because I would have too many people.
Yes. Well, there's give and take with everything, right?
There is. Chris, one of the things I like about your writing, your blog is at clmcgown.com, clmcgown.com/blog, is that you, and I think that's one of the reasons we're kind of kindred spirits, is you kind of challenge a lot of the received wisdom on giving.
I don't ever set out to do that. But when you read and you go through all the different posts that are out there, and there's lots and lots of talking heads out there in the nonprofit sphere. Right. There's probably as many in the nonprofit sphere as there are in the political sphere. Mm-hmm. Not sports, but political. And you start reading what they're saying, and you think, this doesn't align with what we're seeing. This doesn't align with what our donors tell us when we're sitting in their living room. And so you've got to push back and say, this isn't the sky is falling. And just let people know that there's another side out there that really says this isn't as bad as they're trying to make it out to be.
Well, you do it in such a gentle way, but yet I imagine still some of these folks who crunch numbers probably take a little offense.
I've gotten a few hate emails, yes, about my where do I get off on thinking that and saying that and challenging status quo. I definitely have gotten those.
I mean, you wrote this brilliant essay. I think it was for the thebridge.com?
Possibly.
Yeah. Called The Disaster Donor Paradox.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
And can you tell me about that? I mean, you were in the midst of Hurricane Harvey. I mean, you were in the thick of things. You were in Beaumont, Texas. And can you just sort of tell me about, what you discovered?
I can. So I've had the pleasure of serving in national and local disasters on mostly in the administrative side of it for a very long time. My very first national disaster was Hurricane Andrew, that went through Homestead, Florida. So that gives you an idea of just how long I've been doing the disaster work on it. Mm-hmm. And most of it has been in the fundraising and PR side of it. Mm-hmm. And when we went through this, it's always anytime there's a disaster of any magnitude, the public in America particularly, but around the world, opens its heart and opens its wallet, and enormous gifts come out. Mm-hmm. Enormous quantities as well as enormous sizes, from $5 to $5 million and everything in between. And you hear people talking about, these are, you'll hear situational donors, you'll hear sporadic donors, you'll hear they're not giving to an organization, they're giving to they're giving to a cause or to a mission or to a disaster. And that doesn't resonate with anything I've ever seen, anything I've ever heard. The Salvation Army is blessed that we have an enormous donor base of every size, from the nickel donors in our kettles to the clothing articles and on up. And so when you start looking at who our donors are and what it is they're doing for the Salvation Army, it's nearly impossible to say that these are not giving to the Salvation Army. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear, there are a lot of other nonprofits out there doing phenomenal work that are really much better at getting their word out about what they're doing. So if they're giving to us, they're giving to us for a reason, and we need to really honor that, respect that. And when they choose to no longer give in a public way, they go back to their private selves. We have to respect that and honor that, and then continue to treat them with the respect they deserve as our supporters.
Mm-hmm. Chris, so my first two experiences with giving and with fundraising were with UNICEF and Salvation Army. I remember when I was 8 or 7, the actual I can still actually feel the sort of joy that I got from putting money in that kettle.
There's a great book called The Joy of Giving that talks about that emotional response and the need we have as humans to give back. And so it's you're absolutely right. There is a strong emotional trigger to people who help others through a worthy cause, and there's lots of worthy causes. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a strong emotional catch.
And I used to go from door to door. I don't know if you remember these. There were these orange
Oh, yeah.
UNICEF cartons.
Yep.
And I would go
Did the same
door
thing.
to
I was the trick or treat.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was I honestly can't even tell you if I fully understood what UNICEF did, but I felt good, and it helped me develop some skills because to this day I'm a pretty shy guy in certain settings, but just to go door to door and even have a talk. There were some people who just wanted to talk. Some didn't give money, but it was good. It was good to just hear people's stories.
It is, and so I'm glad you were able to have that experience because with today's modern mechanization, we see people getting the donor further and further away from the mission, which is why I think we're seeing that real increase in volunteerism with our next generations, because that writing the check or giving the gift online doesn't have the same appeal as it does when you're able to look someone in the eye and hand it to them and see their reaction, see their gift. And so I think that we're seeing that shift change in how, rather than going door to door with that cup, although that's still a useful tool, there's still organizations out there who do a great job with that,
Right.
Including roadblocks. You drive by and see them alongside the road.
Right. Yes.
That's very emotional, very, very spontaneous giving, and yet there's a good response, even that.
Yeah.
But I think that's why we're seeing volunteerism picking up, so that emotional tie comes back.
Yeah.
To compensate for the distance we now have with how we transact financially.
Okay, I want to talk about it a little bit more, but you actually do something almost unheard of in this area. You have asked anecdotally. You just asked people. You've asked thousands of people. Like, why do you give, and when did you start supporting like the Salvation Army?
I do. I love talking to people who support nonprofits, and I don't care which nonprofit they give, because I believe the stronger the community is, the stronger every nonprofit's going to end up doing ultimately. So I have the pleasure of sitting back and talking to people. Where I do it a lot is around Christmas time, when the Salvation Army is so prevalent. Even though we're serving 365 days a year, we're most prevalent at Christmas time, and so I'll be able to stand there and watch our bell ringers and watch people come and go and be able to talk to them and ask them, why did you give? Why did you not give? Although I don't ever ask it in that way, that's combative. Around Angel Tree, or we're adopting people for Christmas, about what their thought process was, what their giving was, and oftentimes, a lot of times, it's about modeling a behavior they want their children to emulate, and so they're doing.
Interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I can. I love watching it. You'll especially at kettles. If you go to any one of the kettles and just stand there for 20 minutes, you'll see parents giving their children money and telling them to go put it inside the kettle. And so that's just part of that, how they're giving, that very personal thing. With angel trees, where they're adopting angels for the Christmas, you'll see them adopting angels that have a tie. So they may have a 5-year-old son, and they want to go adopt an angel of a 5-year-old boy or a girl. And so they're shopping with their child and able to talk to them about what it is they're doing. And so that's one of the things we're going to look at doing as an organization is, how do we help the parents educate that? How do we give them resources about talking to their kids about those who don't have what they have? And then helping them emulate that and make it into a teachable moment that they don't have to recreate that wheel.
That's fascinating. You've also been challenging the received sort of sky is falling wisdom about the tax reform package and how it'll affect charitable giving.
I have. I don't believe that for the vast majority of nonprofits, they're going to see any meaningful decline in major giving or giving. When we talk to our donors, you'd be amazed how many of them don't even itemize their taxes.
I would
You
be
know,
amazed. I would. What does that say though? That is well, tell me, what does that say?
so it says a few things. One, as our donor base is generally an older donor base,
Okay.
and so that's part of it is that they have already paid off their mortgage.
Right.
And once you pay off your mortgage, you lose the bulk of your incentive to itemize taxes.
Okay.
But that's part of it. The other part of it is they're giving because it's the right thing to do, not a financial incentive. One of the things we went through over the years is to talk about how when they give a gift, they receive the tax advantages of it, they're able to give more because of that. But in all reality, it never happened. I never saw that happening. People didn't increase their giving because they're charitable, because they received any kind of deduction or perceived deduction. They gave the gift that met where they were financially and where their heart was and what they were trying to accomplish, fix, or avoid. Right? So where were they in their life and their mission to make the world a better place? And so we didn't see that. It just didn't play out. And so when we're talking about the tax deduction, well, one, it's still there. Right? Let's just be clear. The charitable tax deduction, it's still there. What the difference is what it takes to be able to really utilize it. The need to itemize your taxes. So now you can give to your church, to your synagogue, to Democracy Cafe, to the Salvation Army, and not have to worry about keeping up with receipts and checks and that sort of thing. I believe there's a real possibility that the average donor, which for the Salvation Army is about $38, we're going to see that increase. We're going to see the number of gifts increase because they don't have to worry about keeping up with those who did. Won't have to worry about keeping up with it. It won't matter anymore. It will just be a real gift. I think where the big change is going to be is that we have conditioned the population, we being society, but specifically the nonprofit sector, have conditioned people to pay attention to the calendar. And so December 31st has sort of become this driver for things. Right. It's created this sense of urgency, and so I think the onus is going to be on nonprofits to create that sense of urgency around their own mission instead of around some false date on a calendar.
That's interesting because I only discovered last year that most giving takes place the last couple, if not the last day of the calendar year.
That is correct. But so let me ask you, I'll ask you the question I've asked tons of nonprofit executives and have never gotten an answer. Do more people give at the end of the year because we spend so much time planning for it and preparing for it and asking for it, or because they want to? Like if we were spent that same amount of time and energy planning and preparing for them to give to a program and mission in June, would they do it? We spend all year long planning for those last 48 hours of the year.
It's like Christmas. It's a tradition with them. They give that day.
It is. And we have donors who try to get as close to the midnight clock as possible. Yes. Like they'll stay up to be able to click it's like they're pulling one over on Uncle Sam. It cracks me up.
I have people, Chris, who say I give to you and I don't give to anybody. You talk about that $38, I get those. I get the $38, $25, $10. It adds up.
It does. It does. A nickel here and a nickel there, and pretty soon you're talking about $1 million. It doesn't.
Oh, are we? Oh, yeah. Dear. Well, I got to hang up.
A lot of nickels.
It's interesting. I have tried MailChimp, something like that, and it falls flat. If I don't write to them personally, I don't get it.
Well, again, it's what we've trained our donor base to do. So, for example, the Salvation Army has trained its donor base over years to respond impersonally. So I did major giving for a really long time, and I would go and I would make an ask, and I can make a presentation and give a spiel, and I walk away with a great nod, and then a week later I get a check in the mail attached to a mail appeal remit for the $50,000.
Amazing. $50,000?
Trained them to do that, right? We've trained them to respond that way. In much the same way you've trained them to respond and look for that very personal reaction. And so I would say to you, there's some other tools you might want to use. There's one called Mash Gmail. We'll talk about that offline sometime. Okay. But you're absolutely right. It is what we've told you to do, what we've trained them to do. Yeah. And also the perceived value,
Yes.
right? Which says to me they perceive the value of your contact.
Mm-hmm.
So all we got to do is help them understand the value of other contacts.
Well, one thing I have found in the civic discourse, civic participation realm, like most of the big philanthropics with Boku bucks, they're left wing. They're left leaners. This idea of me bringing together people across the political spectrum, as much as they might pay lip service to that, it's actually anathema to them because they think they're right. Um, I've had a
Well,
lot of people. There's this one philanthropic group that I thought was pay dirt for me, but they've radically shifted to the left since Trump was elected, and they won't touch me with a 10-foot pole.
well, so as much as we as a society say we need to stop talking inside of our own, what is the term? Echo chamber, right?
Right.
That's the term we've coined. The reality is we are actually pushing more and more and more to echo chamber, and those who are in the most powerful positions to control communications are doing the same thing. Facebook is changing its algorithm. Twitter's introducing or is considering introducing an algorithm, all of which are aimed at giving you content you want to hear, and not a whole lot
Ah.
what challenges them.
No, they even use these branding words called trust-based philanthropy, but they
Yes.
don't trust anybody except for the people who really are on that sort of radical margin. I don't say that to be snarky. It's just been a real revelation to me.
It is, and so I would say to you, they believe very much what they're saying. They just define the words differently than you and I do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Chris, you wrote this beautiful piece about just gratitude. Thank you. There's kind of a process involved.
There is. First of all, it's much, and you know this, and it comes natural to you. If it isn't sincere, it is actually detrimental.
Hmm.
If it is really an insincere thank you, it is detrimental. And I would say to you, as many ways and times you can thank somebody who took the time to pick you. I mean, there are, I forget the IRS's number, several thousand charities created every single month inside the United States. And so you start looking at how do they find us and pick us and give to us. It is genuinely a miracle that they do so, and I suggest we have to be sincere in that. And the way we do that has to respond to what the donor views. Much like we talk about, pop culture, we'll talk about love languages. How do you communicate with your spouse or your significant other the way they want to be communicated with, right? That's good, strong communication skills. And the same is true with gratitude and showing that gratitude. For some, a form thank you in the mail that meets their need is all they want, right? They're not interested in it. They love what you do and they wanna be involved, but at an arm's width. Others want to be right in there in the trenches with you, and others want to know that they matter enough that the boss calls or hunches over their email keyboard and types out a personal thank you. It is very much a process, and it has to be as personal and have as many differentiated avenues as possible.
Chris, you're somebody who uniquely has your ear to the ground about things. And how are you feeling about giving and today, and how it's related to democratic vibrancy?
So I think it is going to grow significantly. I think we're going to see the old adage, put your money where your mouth is, start to increase. I'm a bit concerned about what that means as far as true democracy. I don't believe that you buy elections. Otherwise, we'd have completely different presidents through time. But I do believe money has an influence and can have an influence. It's just ludicrous to suggest otherwise, in my opinion. So I think the giving is going to dramatically increase in that. The trend that we're seeing now, especially with mega donors, so there's really, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, is they're moving away from what we would consider charitable giving. They're saying, you know what, we don't care about the tax advantage. We care about making the difference we care about. and they are funneling funds how they want to funnel them, where they want to funnel them to get done what they want to get done. And it's gonna be an interesting response to see how nonprofits respond to that. To say, are they going to try to follow suit and follow the money, or are they going to say, no, this is our mission, and we want to align ourselves with those who care about that mission? And that's where I hope nonprofits land. But I think we're going to see increased giving, but I think we're going to see it far more targeted than it has been in the past.
Interesting. I have some compatriots who have other nonprofits, and they've told me how they've had to change their mission to accommodate the funding they've been given and they do it.
And I would say to you, there are nonprofits that are naturally fluid in the way they're structured and done. Okay. But then there are other nonprofits where the mission is what the mission is. Uh-huh. And for those nonprofits, and I would suggest to you it's possible Democracy Cafe is one of those, you don't want to chase the dollars. You want to chase the donors who care about the mission.
Okay. I mean, the Salvation Army, I remember when I first gave, I honestly wasn't quite sure of all that it did. I would never have guessed that it was involved so deeply in disaster relief, for instance.
You'd be surprised. Some of our very largest donors don't understand what all the Salvation Army does. Fascinating. It is just one of those things where we've over the years built a reputation, and I would argue a deserved one, that says we do good work, but no one's ever really spelled out what that is. And
that's fascinating.
Well, it's terrifying for someone who's in charge of communications, right? It's like, my job is to get that message out there, and we're obviously failing at it. Because we don't know. People don't know that we serve in 127 countries around the world. Right. They don't know that we serve every zip code in the United States. They don't know that we're open, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, meeting that need, whatever that need is in that community. And so it is really a challenge for us, but it's one that we're up for and we're going to take. And I hope, I'm definitely not in the C-suite, as they call it. I can't imagine us changing our mission. How we act out that mission has changed over the 165 years, or 150 years, but the mission has not. And so I imagine we will continue to stay strong behind the mission and hope we find donors who align with that.
I became more appreciative than ever and enlightened than ever when there's obviously more information out there now about the very integral role that Salvation Army plays in disaster relief.
There is, and part of that is just, how do I say this politely? Part of it is
You don't have to be polite.
Part of it is some of the other major players have really stubbed their toes, and that has enabled the larger audience to look beyond them to say, who else is here that we can talk to, because we don't want to have that on our channel. And so that's really what has come in. We've not changed what we do. We've done what we've always done. We're still, to this day, serving in Beaumont, Texas. To those who were impacted by that massive floods after the hurricanes. And so, but you're not going to see that in the news. See, communication's failing again. This is not a good call for me so far, Chris.
But that must have been exhausting for you personally. You didn't expect maybe to be in the trenches in Beaumont, but it came to you.
It does. And it is exhausting because you work 20-hour days for 14 straight days, but it's only 14 days, and then you're back home.
Okay. But 14 days is a lot.
It is a lot. But I remind myself of two things. My wife had a teenager and a preteen for 14 days by herself, and I'd rather have been where I was. And
Thank you for that frank admission.
And those that we serve live with it every single day, 24 hours a day. And I go home to a beautiful home and a beautiful wife and children who are still there. And it's hard not to look back at it and get a little bit choked up about I'm living this life, and they were, and there, but for the grace of God go I.
You've got this really beautiful, keen social conscience, and on your Twitter page, what's your Twitter handle, Chris?
At CL McGowan.
At CL McGowan.
Yeah.
CLMCGOWA.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You have your kids on your photo. And you talk about how, a big part of your mission is about to make sure that your boys, grow up in a vibrant society.
I want to make sure they inherit a better world than I do. And you hear a lot about this generation where this will be the first generation that won't do as well as their parents' generation. And I keep saying to myself every time I read those, you're looking at the wrong key performance indicator.
Fascinating.
If all you're worried about is how much money you're making, we as parents have failed.
Yeah.
Money is a tool, not a goal.
That's so beautifully put.
And so, I want to make sure the world they inherit is better than what I did. I inherited a great world. I'm not complaining, but I want it to be better.
But Chris, do you think most people who make charitable giving, make that connection, are really thinking about 1, 2, 5, 10 generations from hence and making that world better?
No, I don't. I think their thought process is making the world better for Johnny. And I think everybody who gives, no, that's not true. I think a significant number of people who give have a very specific image in their mind when they're giving. And it isn't a faceless person in a gutter. It isn't a person who they can't fathom or concept. I think that most people give with a very clear image of somebody or something in their mind. I mentioned it earlier. We often talk about in fundraising, people give to accomplish, fix, or avoid something, right? And so I think they're giving with that a very clear image. And I don't believe it's remote. I don't believe it's 5 years away. In our cause, I believe it is in other parallels or other sectors of nonprofit. I think, for example, the environmental causes. I think you'll see they are very much future focused. Action today for future. Not so much for this. It would be hard-pressed for anyone to give to the Salvation Army thinking they're going to end homelessness. There's not been a period of time in recorded history where there has not been homelessness, and there's no hope it's going to go away. Right. The only question is how do we treat them and how do we deal with them?
Do you think, though, that when they give, even if it's more of a local impact or national impact, they're also thinking about other people on the other side of the globe?
I do. I do think that, at least for a portion of it. And I often think of it as a lot of our donors have inherited either intentionally or just by their nature of their makeup, what I call I don't call it the starfish mentality, right? I can't help everybody, so I'll help Johnny. And I think that is sort of what it is. And I think sometimes they have the child you see with the swollen stomach and the flies swarm around their head, and in their mind as they write a gift to a nonprofit who may or may not even serve inside of that sector.
Chris, where did your own, very unique and profound social conscience combine with this great ability and passion for actually listening to people and their stories and finding out even, why they give and why they're coming from, where they're coming from? Where did that come from with you? Where do you get that from?
I would say I would credit, if you will, my upbringing. My mother's. I have no memories of Christmas that does not involve standing beside. My earliest memory is standing beside my mother at a Salvation Army kettle, ringing a bell. It just went hand in hand with how our family how my mother and the boys, my brother and I, celebrated Christmas. And the other part of it goes into my grandfather, my maternal mother's stepfather, who did a lot of my raising as a child, was very quick to say, with a few expletives thrown in, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth, treat it that way, listen to people, care about people, and you'll go a long way. And he practiced that, right? He would ask me questions as a 5-year-old, and he would listen, and he would ask questions, and he would be involved and model the very behavior he was telling me to do. I learned when I was much later, he used to test me all the time. He'd hand me a piece of the newspaper and tell me, read this article and tell me why that matters. So he was testing my reading comprehension, my ability to simulate information and project it into where I am. It was a very wise man for someone who didn't even graduate high school. Just had an amazing sense of caring for others. Even when he didn't like them or agree with them, he cared about them as people, and he taught that to me, and I've tried to make him proud ever since.
Well, I'm sure he is. My Christopher L. McGowan, very accomplished consultant, also Divisional Director of Communications and Donor Engagement for the Salvation Army's Kentucky and Tennessee Division. Thank you so much for being on our podcast, and I look forward to doing this again with you. I already look forward to it.
As do I. It was an honor. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.